Welcome to Lead Well, Live Whole. I'm your host, Michael Sirmon. Every episode, we'll spend a few minutes exploring the challenges, questions, and realities of everyday life, because success means little if you lose yourself in the process. So take a breath, settle in, and let's spend a few minutes exploring life together. Have you ever noticed how some of the strongest prisons in the world don't have bars? They don't have guards. They don't have razor wire. From the outside, they don't even look like prisons at all, because they exist inside of us. Welcome back to Lead Well, Live Whole. I'm Michael Sirmon. Most of us have been hurt by someone. Sometimes it was intentional, and sometimes it wasn't. Sometimes it happened last week. Sometimes it's been 20 years. And if we're honest, it still stings when we think about it. Maybe it was a parent who wasn't there, a spouse who broke your trust, a friend who walked away, a boss who took credit for your work, or someone who lied about you. More often than not, it was someone who abused your trust. And sometimes maybe it was someone who simply failed to be the person that we desperately needed them to be. Whatever the story is, the wound is real. The pain is real. And honestly, you've carried it far too long. And you've probably discovered something that I have, that time doesn't automatically heal everything. Sometimes time simply teaches us how to carry the pain more effectively or more quietly. I've met people who can smile in public while privately replaying conversations that happened years ago. They can remember every word, every detail, every emotion. It's almost as though they're still living in that moment. I've done it myself. I've been hurt. I've been hurt by churches. I've been hurt by organizations. I've been hurt by people. I've been hurt by family members. I've been hurt by people who hurt me without even intending to hurt me, right? And often they didn't even know they did it. But most of the time they did, right? We replay the conversations over and over in our minds, and we imagine what we should have said, right? We wonder how things could have been different. We convince ourselves that holding on to our anger somehow is protecting us. But over time, something strange begins to happen, right? The person who hurt us, they move on with their life, and they may not even remember what they said or what they did. And more often than not, they never apologize. Yet somehow they are still influencing our peace. And that raises a very difficult question, right? Who is really in this prison, right? I think one of Satan's greatest lies is convincing us that unforgiveness punishes the other person. And honestly, most of the time it doesn't. It punishes us. It steals our joy. It colors our relationships. It shapes how we trust people. And it whispers suspicion into healthy relationships. It teaches us to keep people at a distance because we're convinced ourselves that distance is the safest place to be. And before long, the person who wounded us years ago is still making decisions in our life today. Folks, that's not freedom, that's captivity. Now, whenever the subject of forgiveness comes up, I know what some of you are thinking. But Michael, you don't know what happened. And you're right, I don't. Some of you have experienced betrayal that's difficult to even put into words. Some of you have been abandoned. Some of you have been manipulated. You've been abused. You've been lied to by the people who should have protected you. And I would never minimize that pain. And I don't believe God minimizes it either. Because forgiveness is not pretending something didn't happen. Forgiveness is not calling evil good. And forgiveness is not forgetting. Forgiveness is not automatically trusting someone again. Sometimes people hear forgiveness and assume it means removing every boundary and pretending that everything is fine. But, that's not biblical forgiveness. That's really not world forgiveness. Trust and forgiveness are not the same thing. Trust is rebuilding through repentance, consistency of time. Forgiveness is something entirely different. Forgiveness is releasing your right to revenge into God's hands. Right? God says that either he will have, or actually what he says is vengeance is his and that he will repay. And I learned early on that I can choose to try to enact vengeance myself, and that kind of places it in God's hands, and that always goes wrong for me. Or I can just relax in who I am and who I'm called to be and let God do what he does and be who he is. And his way is always, always so much better, right? So forgiveness is choosing to stop carrying a weight that was never yours to carry. Paul writes in Romans 12, "Do not take revenge, my dear friends, but leave room for God's wrath." That isn't because God, right, somehow doesn't care about justice. It's because he remembers things that we sometimes forget, that justice belongs to him and freedom belongs to us. One of the most powerful moments in Scripture comes when Jesus is hanging on the cross. He's been mocked, he's been beaten, he's been rejected. Nails have been driven through his hands and feet, and the people, standing beneath him are laughing. They're mocking him. They're gambling for his clothes, right? And what does he say? He says, "Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing." And those words often amaze me, right? Not because he somehow made forgiveness look easy, because it wasn't, and he didn't, but because Jesus refused to let hatred have the final word. Right? If anyone had the right to hold on to bitterness, it was Jesus. Instead, he chose love. He chose mercy. He chose forgiveness. And then he invited us to do the same. But there's another story Jesus tells that has challenged me for years. In Matthew 18, Peter asked Jesus, "Lord, how many times shall I forgive my brother or sister who sins against me?" He said, "Up to 7 times. Peter probably thought that was being incredibly generous. Jesus said, "I tell you, not 7 times, but 77 times. He then tells the story of a servant who was forgiven of an impossible debt, a debt so large that he could never repay it. And then instead of extending the same mercy to someone else, he grabbed another servant by the throat over a comparatively small, a minor debt. And Jesus' point really wasn't that what happened to us is small. His point was this: when we truly understand how much we've been given, it changes the way we extend forgiveness to others. The cross was a way of leveling the ground beneath all of us, right? Every one of us has needed grace. Every one of us has needed mercy. Every one of us has been forgiven more than we deserved. That doesn't ease the wounds that people have caused, but it does reshape our response. I think one of the reasons forgiveness is so difficult is because we confuse forgiveness with fairness, right? We want things to be made right. We want the apology. We want the acknowledgement. We want someone to finally say, "I was wrong." And sometimes that happens, but many times it doesn't. So if our freedom depends on somebody's apology, we've handed the control of ourselves, of our peace, of our minds, of our lives, of our future over to them, right? And that's far too much power to give another human being. Forgiveness says, "I refuse to let your sin define the rest of my story." It says, "I'm placing this in God's hands because he is a better judge than I will ever be." It says, "I choose freedom, even if justice comes later." But let me say something equally important, that some of you need boundaries, right? Forgiveness does not require you stay in an abusive relationship. It does not require you to return to an unsafe situation. It does not require you to ignore wisdom. Jesus forgave freely, yet he didn't trust himself to everyone, right? Grace and wisdom can walk together. And as we walk today, I want to ask you a question. Who have you been carrying? Whose name immediately came to mind while you listened today? Whose memory still has the power to change your mood? What conversation are you still replaying? Maybe you've been waiting years for an apology that will never come. Maybe you've been hoping someone else will unlock the prison door. But what if they never do? What if freedom was never dependent on them? What if the key has been in your hand all along? Maybe today isn't the day you feel forgiveness. Maybe today is simply the day you begin asking God to help you want to forgive. And sometimes that's where the healing begins. One honest prayer. Lord, I don't know how to let this go. I don't even know if I want to. But I know I don't want to live in prison anymore. So help me. God's always honored answered prayers or honest prayers. But before we finish today, let me leave you with one final thought. The greatest miracle of forgiveness isn't what it changes in the person who hurt you. It's what it changes in you. It loosens the grip of bitterness. It makes room for joy again. It restores peace. It reminds us that the same grace we've received through Jesus Christ is the grace we're invited to extend to others. We talk about leadership in business, leadership at home, leadership in organizations and in clubs and different things. But the truth is, it's hard to really settle into the identity of your leadership when someone else is determining your identity, when someone else is setting the parameters for who you are, because we've allowed ourselves to build a prison around us, to build walls that separate us from our true identity. So let's make room for joy. Let's make room for peace. Let's get rid of the bitterness. Let's settle into who we are and who we're called to be. All right, I want to thank you for spending these few minutes with me today. I never take your time or your trust for granted, and I'm grateful you choose to spend a small part of your week here with me. So if today's conversation encouraged you, would you do me a favor? Share this episode with someone who may be carrying a burden they were never meant to carry. Sometimes one simple conversation can become the turning point in someone else's story. And if you're watching on YouTube, I'd also appreciate it if you'd like this episode and subscribe to the channel. Those simple actions help more people discover these conversations, and together we can continue reaching people who are searching for hope, clarity, and a deeper sense of purpose. And if you're listening on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Podbean, iHeart, or whatever other streaming service it is, be sure to follow the podcast so you don't miss future episodes. And if your platform allows you to leave a rating or review, these reviews make a tremendous difference and help others decide to join our community. And if you'd like to learn more about my coaching, my books, my speaking, or even explore additional articles and resources, I'd love to connect with you. You can find everything at michaelsirmon.com. So until next time, remember this. Leadership doesn't begin with a title. It begins with identity. So lead well, live whole. God bless, and I'll see you next time. If today's conversation raised a question you've been wrestling with, I'd love to help. I offer one-on-one coaching for individuals navigating pressure, transition, and important decisions. You can learn more at michaelsirmon.com.